Jonathan Kuminga chooses Minnesota. Jeannie Buss chooses courts. Big day for the Lakers on Wednesday. That's next.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks to everybody for stopping by. Locked On Lakers, Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. Such a busy Wednesday it was, Andy. We finally have some resolution to the Jonathan Kuminga saga. You might be happy. You might not be happy. We'll discuss that in a second. We'll, of course, get into Jeannie Buss. It's going to not terribly surprising here, Andy. Drag her siblings into court, clinging, gripping tightly that governorship that she just doesn't want to give up. She just likes what people call her governor. Doesn't want to give it up, and we'll talk about that, see how it might resolve. But the on the court stuff, Andy, that's what is going to where we're going to start today. Jonathan Kuminga chooses Minnesota. We talked about that possibility for Wednesday's show and why that might make sense. A lot of people thought that's where he would end up. 2 years, $13 million. Second year is a player option. The consensus seems to be the team Kuminga believes that he can go start as he would have in LA, play really well, and get that big $25 million a year contract or whatever that he's been looking for the whole time.
Some would say the big $25 million contract that he's turned down, because he's actually turned down deals under those parameters with, say, Golden State. Like, it's going to be fascinating to see how, and I'm not big into pocket watching players to begin with, but it is actually going to be really interesting to see how much money Jonathan Kuminga ends up making in his career, and then just comparing that final number against some of the contracts that he turned down, and just be like, dude, there may have ended up a much easier way to do a lot of this.
Even Dennis Schroeder thinks he should fire his agent. So we'll see how this goes. The Lakers, by all reports, had stuck to that 3-year deal worth about $12 million a year as a financial option. This, of course, is before you get to the part, and we'll talk about this in a moment, about executing we got to execute a trade to bring Kuminga here. But starting just with the mechanics of this, Kuminga clearly believed that it was in his financial best interests to have flexibility again next year in an offseason when more teams are set to have more cap space than they currently do. I think I am in the same boat as you, wondering, I think ultimately if he plays really well for Minnesota, he's probably going to earn somebody's full mid-level. He would have to play bonkers good. Peyton Watson, who is seen as an up-and-coming guy, had this, big January, you could argue, has not necessarily done more in the league than Kuminga, but I think has a more travelable skill set in terms of defense, established defensive presence than Kuminga's offensive presence has value.
And Watson has had, albeit in short sample sizes, because everything with Peyton Watson has been small sample sizes, but he's been a better outside shooter as well than yes. Jonathan Kuminga. Kuminga, I think Kuminga is on volume a more established player than Peyton Watson, even if I think neither can really call themselves established. But I think Watson is seen as the guy who's already shown more flashes of what teams typically want, and also has not seemed as difficult to deal with.
I was about to say, that is the critical aspect of it. He's already played the role that, for example, Cleveland signed him to play. He's going to go in there. He doesn't expect to be getting more touches than Mitchell, and they got a lot of offensive talent around that roster, and James Harden and all these other things. He's going to go there and play a role as a 3-and-D guy that in certain games he's going to put up 18. He'll probably have a couple 25-point games this year, whatever. But his job is going to be sort of hold the thing together and be a really important defensive presence for that team. Kuminga, the criticisms of him are legitimate in terms of he seems like he's a guy who needs to have the ball in his hands a lot. Like, it's not that he's not talented, but what role does he play? The athleticism is there to play defense. But the results have been a little bit more spotty on that end. There's a lot of the potential is there, but the results haven't been. It's funny to me because, like, in absolute terms, I'm hardly angry about this because it's not just, you can't just look at it as like, what's the deal? Like, the Lakers could have offered a little bit more money or whatever. Everything about getting Kuminga here, once you move off of the number you're comfortable with, adds complications. If you agree to a bigger number, you're likely going to have to make a bigger trade. To make a bigger trade, you're probably going to have to use more of, maybe 2, possibly all 3 of your second round picks that you have just to get guys off of your roster. Remember, the Lakers already have 1 too many guys. Atlanta has 2 too many guys.
Right, which means you're going to have to loop in all likelihood, a third team, maybe a fourth. Team. And like, it just starts getting the deal that moved Peyton Watson to Cleveland ultimately became a 5-team deal that involved the trade that sent Dennis Schroeder to Charlotte, among other deals. But that particular one involving Schroeder happened like a week before. But you ended up looping that in on Cleveland's end just because this all gets so complicated. And there was just a much simpler forget what Kuminga values and the audience, the listeners, the viewers, your opinion of what it seems that Kuminga values. From a pure logistical standpoint, getting Kuminga to Minnesota was cleaner. They're going to end up having to dump somebody or waive and stretch somebody. The expectations are it's going to be Josh Green. And the deadline, by the way, for stretch provisions is this coming Saturday. But Minnesota,
something to keep an eye on for the Lakers.
Right. And Minnesota's going to have to do some type of machination to get Kuminga on the roster. But it's much simpler than what the Lakers would have needed to do to pull off a sign and trade. Like, before you even get into making Kuminga happy, like, the making everybody else play along with it factor was just way harder.
And like, there were things I liked about, if you could, part of the reason I kind of liked this trade, if they could do it, is because almost definitionally, while you're giving up some assets, you're clearing out roster spots that could, you're subbing out at least, 1 or 2, whether it's Hardy and Connect or Vando or some combination of those guys. You're subbing out dead spots on your roster for at least one guy is going to come in and play. In Kuminga, it would have been your starting 4. And then opening up spots to potentially sign a couple of street free agents that might have more value to you. So, like, from a roster balance standpoint, it made a lot of sense, except, there is a cost to that. And, is Kuminga worth the X amount of dollars, the flexibility that it robs you going into next year, and multiple second round picks? I think it's questionable.
I think there's also another piece of this that you have to question whether it's worth it. And that's the massaging and cajoling and making sure that you are keeping Jonathan Kuminga happy in his role and happy with his job, not concerned about how this contract theoretical with the Lakers would have, balanced up against or compared up against, these 7 other contracts that he's clearly envisioning, because he always seems to be concerned about his next contract. Like,
does he get to spread and wing his wings and fly with the Lakers, Andy? I think he's legitimately asking himself that question.
Well, but also he wants to fly in a very specific way.
Right.
Like,
exactly.
He's a very specific bird that only flies one way. And we've talked about this before. There are enough moving pieces and things to figure out with this revamped roster as it is. And both of us like the potential of this roster to be a good team, like a good playoff team with still some work to do and a couple transaction cycles or whatever. But Grimes, Mamu, Sexton, Kessler, Austin re-signed. These are all guys that very clearly wanted to be Lakers and were willing to commit to this early. And yeah, I think Rob gave them all player-friendly contracts. There's no question, but these are all guys that wanted to be here. Like in the case of Grimes and Mamu and Sexton, like they took themselves off the free agency market like 9 minutes into free agency, seemingly, because, you know, again, they like the terms of the deal, but they wanted to be here. With Kuminga, it felt more like the Lakers were the equivalent of a showcase, like just a place where he could showcase what he could do, spotlight himself, and it would be the setup for the next deal he always seems to be worrying about, whether with the Lakers or with someone else. And if he had a longer term deal with the Lakers, it is easy to imagine him wondering about the money that he thinks he could have given up in the future. And I just don't think that that's a good fit for what he's kind of like a less accomplished James Harden, like in the way James Harden is very clearly always thinking about his next deal. James Harden, though, is also a first ballot Hall of Famer. Like, you can get away with that a little easier when you're him as opposed to Kuminga.
Well, yeah. And, you know, James Harden, even now, is still a really, really good player. And also is really good at playing that money maximization game, which
it
Kuminga
has not bit him in the ass yet. I'll give him that.
He keeps making it work. That said, there is a loss here for the Lakers that is worth discussing, and it does have an impact on what this year is going to look like, at least right now. And so we'll get into that. Plus, Jeannie Sue's next.
Locked on Lakers is brought to you by Indeed. When workplace chaos hits and you need the right hire, Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps connect employers with candidates who match specific needs like skills, certification, and location. So less time gets spent searching, more time spent finding the right fit. People are finding quality hires on Indeed right now. In the minute I'm going to be talking with you, companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. And one great addition to the workplace can have a ripple effect on everyone around them. When you find someone who brings the right skills, attitude, and experience, it makes the entire group better. It's why finding qualified candidates matters so much. Spend less time searching, more time actually interviewing candidates who check all the boxes, so there's less stress, less time, and more results. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs. And listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help you get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now. Support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
So we'll get to Jeannie here in a moment, but I would have been okay. 12 million a year, you know, if the price isn't too low, just sort of financial end of it. I would have been, I think, to add a player of Kuminga's quality and potential, even if it's not a perfect fit, for a deal that is reasonable like that, I would have, I think, been okay with it. Like, you know, I wouldn't have objected. I would have had concerns. I would have wondered about it. I would have needed to see kind of the evidence. I wouldn't have had a problem with it. I do think, though, the Lakers it was smart to draw a line somewhere and just say, look, this is as far as we can go looking big picture. But in the short term, they are not as good as they would have been had they signed Kuminga. Had they exchanged, because I mentioned the sort of ripple effect potentially on the roster, maybe you open up a couple empty spots that you can use for players who might be more useful than, say, a Jaden Hardy or something like that. Or Bronny or whoever it is. Like, you know, you add more depth to your roster that way. You slide players like Mamu into a clear backup role where I think they are much more likely to thrive. You take a guy like Jake LaRavia or Zaire Williams, guys who might start out of necessity, and you slide them probably to bench roles where they, I think, are more likely to thrive. they would have been better off in the short term, at the very least, signing Jonathan Kuminga. So the question becomes, okay, what do you do now? Like, you've held on to these assets, presumably they will get used, but like, where do you turn at this point? Like, if they're not going to sign him, I do think it's important that they try to find a more viable backup center somewhere, as a for example.
I'm sure they're going to try. The market out there is not big, and as we talked about earlier, they have one too many guys on the roster as it is. So if they're going to try to bring in that center that you're talking about, or player TBD, they're ultimately going to need to shed two guys, because you're talking about bringing in somebody extra. If you brought in one more, the math doesn't work. So you got to, there is work that would need to be done. I think it's important to make sure that you're not burning the remaining assets that you have on somebody that you may not be sure about, because in a lot of ways, that's your last all-in card. Like, it may not be a great all-in card. If you play poker, it's the equivalent of going all in with like pocket sixes. You know, you could do worse, but you definitely could do better. But I feel like, you know, it probably would have taken most of, if not all of those seconds, just to make the mechanics of an expanded deal.
I think at least two. Yeah.
At least two, but maybe all three.
Maybe.
And, you know, you're going to have stuff down the road, but in terms of what you can work with this season, I feel like, putting aside whether or not you could get the Hawks and third team X, fourth team X to cooperate, I feel like you have to be really sure about the fit with Kuminga, both on the court and I think especially culturally, if you want to make that move. I am totally fine waiting on it, just because I don't feel like they're going to win a championship this year with or without Kuminga. I think they're going to be a good team. I think they're going to be a playoff team. I think you're correct that Kuminga would make them better, just because it's one NBA player that you can put on the court as to somebody else that you feel more shaky about. But I don't think he's the difference between getting to the ultimate prize, a championship, and not. And given the questions that I think there are with him, even at a deal that, I agree with you, 3 and 36, and in this, let's just say in this scenario, all three are fully guaranteed, you know, no outs on either, you know, no non-guarantee, whatever. It's still reasonable. I'm fine waiting.
Me too. That's what I think is really great. It's like, I've been cool with it, because I don't think, assuming Kuminga didn't completely implode, I don't think it would have been prohibitive from making future moves, from making a different trade, from trading him, from whatever it might be. I think it would have been okay. But I'm okay with him waiting. But it'll be one of these things. It's like, there are certain moments where you start to compare, when the future moves happen. Oh, was this, they used 2 seconds and a whatever to bring in X, Y, and Z, or they did this and this with those, or they drafted players A, B, and C, whoever it might be. And you say, was that better than using those guys to move off Kuminga? Somebody else signs, different veterans that they might have been able to bring in if they could open up roster spots. This is what makes it kind of fun. And then next year you look at it and you say, well, the space that they were able to save because they didn't bump up higher or whatever it might be, because they didn't pay him, do they do better in the long run? And I certainly think, there's a very good chance you can end up with a better outcome by not making this trade. I would have been fine if they did it, assuming the price and other stuff wasn't too bad. But I'm also fine with them not.
Here's the other piece of this too, as far as a reason that I'm okay with it. And look, Jonathan Kuminga could have a really good season with Minnesota.
I think we should assume he will. I think you should assume he'll play perfectly. Also, too, it's worth noting, he picked them. Like, the Lakers can't make Kuminga sign with them. He did not want to be under a 3-year contract. I don't think if they could make it 3 and 39 instead of 36, I don't think that would have made the difference. No, it was the 3 that was the problem, not the number that came after it.
He and his team are always thinking about that next deal and picturing that next deal. Again, I think this strategy has backfired on them pretty badly, and if nothing else, has made the money that he likely, if he ends up making it, I don't think it's going to be much different. He's just made it 10 times harder, but whatever. That's on them. If that's the way they want to do it, whatever. I will say, though, insofar as one of the reasons that I'm okay with this, I would rather have the opportunity to see more of Cameron Carr, see more of Adu Thero, and what those guys can do, and the opportunities to put them out there. I'm not going to say they go away with Kuminga, but Kuminga is going to eat into some of those opportunities. And I think for the big picture of this team, like the next 1 to 3 years, and really trying to maximize what they have now and doing what I know I've talked about a lot, the idea of using this season as a way of fine-tuning for next year after a transaction cycle or two, where I really feel like, no, they have to be a serious playoff contender. I think Cameron Carr and Adu Thero, if there's a possibility of them playing a role in that, it's important to get started on it now.
I would agree with you. The counter to that is Kuminga's 23. And so, what I would do in that situation is just, it's fewer minutes for Jake. It's fewer, for a 23-year-old player,
I guess,
who fits into your
timeline
on a 3-year deal, that part of it would have been okay. But I do think the upshot of this is you are going to give Thero and those guys hopefully a little bit more space to run. So that part of it, I think it is reasonable to say, and I think it is fair, and I don't think it's whatever to say that that this is a loss, that I think you should assume he's going to play well in Minnesota, but it's also okay. I will tell you this: if our board on the YouTube shows and our Twitter feed is any indication, people are going to be really happy this is done. Mm-hmm. The Jonathan Kuminga saga is done. What is only beginning, Andy, is the spicy hot courtroom battle between Jeannie Buss and her siblings. It's awkward holidays. That's next. All right, so Andy, Jeannie Buss is officially taken the Sibs to court. She is seeking to remove Janie and Joey as co-trustees of the family trust for this, according to Ramona Shelburne and ESPN, breaching their fiduciary duty, in noting in that process that the two other Lakers minority owners, Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong and Ed Roski, have joined her in that decision to retain a stake in the franchise. Basically, Soon-Shiong saying he's not selling because he believes this is an appreciating asset. So Jeannie is saying it's the fiduciary duty towards the trust to hold on to this thing for at least as long as she's governor. I made that part up. I don't think that's in the file.
Well, not really. Not really. You made that up, but not really.
Right.
No. No. Because it's clear she could have a stake in the Lakers even if her brothers and sister left. She just can't be governor or have the type of juice that she wants. To the best of my knowledge, the other guys bouncing and Jeannie staying, I have not heard that that's not on the table, other than Jeannie doesn't want it that way.
Well, theoretically, it violates that order that she has to. They have to do what is in whatever interest of keeping her as keep a share to allow her to be controlling owner. Which again, I don't really think she is in any meaningful way. She's not. Once this thing goes through. But anyway, she's challenging.
She isn't now. Right. She isn't now.
She's challenging
Forget
the legality.
What happens in Iger Kushner era. She isn't now.
She's challenging the legality of the vote last week to sell the remaining shares in the franchise. The language in there, it's her lawyer, Adam Streisand
effect.
It is called it, quote, devious behavior orchestrated as a part of a calculated effort to create a public fait accompli before Jeannie could respond. It says they're doing this to punish their sister. That part is actually probably true. But they have
similar to how they felt when Jeannie
fired. She's fired all of them.
Well, no, not Johnny. She's just sued Johnny.
No, she
Never
sued
fired
Johnny and excommunicated him.
Right, but never fired him.
No, it
because he
didn't
have
fire.
a job
That's
with
true.
the Lakers.
That's true. So
I don't want to paint her out to be worse than she is.
So
she can't fire a guy who doesn't have a job.
Is there some animus here from the siblings? Of course there is. We pointed that out at the time, that they were taking this opportunity, probably gleefully, to knife Jeannie and force her out of this thing as a bit of revenge. But that said, the animus is certainly well earned given the history here. So look, can't say I'm surprised by this. I was expecting a court battle. We've talked about that. But the language is certainly stark, and it doesn't seem, it seems neither likely to end quickly or something that's going to be constructive for the Lakers in the meantime.
It's interesting when you talk about the language of the filing, because there's a lot in this from Adam Streisand, who, should be clear, is an excellent lawyer by all accounts. He's really good at this stuff, but also it's pretty clear.
Ask Johnny Buss.
Yeah, yeah. But it's also pretty clear Adam Streisand likes the spotlight, and he likes to do a lot of this stuff publicly.
I think all Streisands like the spotlight.
They really do. And
something with the name.
Yeah, no relation. But it feels like
Doesn't
the
matter.
statement and proclamations from Adam Streisand are about winning in the court of public opinion.
Correct.
Which, dare I say, not working, in part because I think most fans don't consider Jeannie an extension of Dr. Buss in the most important way, which was incredible ultimate shot caller of the Lakers, and somebody that you always felt like the Lakers were in incredible hands, and therefore it was essential for him to be there. Like, I think a lot of Laker fans have affection towards Jeannie for being a part of this family that a lot of them, a lot of Laker fans have quite literally grown up with this family, watched members of this family. A lot of them watched Jeannie grow up, like depending on their age, or they may have been the same age. They kind of literally grew up with her. But I don't think the overwhelming majority consider her essential to the Lakers moving forward insofar as its success, or frankly, all that successful when she had been the ultimate shot caller. So the idea that you're going to turn public opinion in a way where all of a sudden there's going to be this fan call for Jeannie to remain in this, frankly, fake governor role at all costs, I just don't see that happening.
No, there's a thing that happens with athletes where finding the end is really hard. Like seeing when the end is here, and like Russell Westbrook struggled with it. And, because you want to keep doing the thing that you love. And I don't doubt that Jeannie loves the team, loves Lakers, feels an obligation to her father, all these other things. It's also sort of the totality in a lot of ways of her identity, and I don't mean that as a criticism. I'm not like saying, she's an unfulfilled woman because she's very fulfilled. That's not the point.
Part of the Lakers dynasty is one hell of an identity. I'd kill to have that one. I mean, it is no shade to Jeannie at all to say she's wrapped up in her identity of being part of one of the greatest franchises in sports history.
But
I get it.
But the family, her parents are gone. Like the family relationship is, to say the least, stressed. I think it's fair to say. And there's a certain it is hard for many athletes to walk away. I think it is hard for Jeannie to understand when things are done here. And I put a hypothetical to you when we were talking about this earlier, because I think it was interesting that Adam Streisand framed this in the terms of fiduciary duty to the trust, which means like they have an obligation to do what is best for the group from a financial standpoint.
And I want to make sure we put a pin in. Keep going, but I want to put a pin in that because there's another aspect of this that I want to make sure we get to before we're done. But continue.
So, if she's saying that it is, and you could argue, the franchise granted Jeannie probably encouraged them to sell low a year and a half ago, but it went $2.5 billion. And like, so you could argue that in 5 years that, it could be worth more and they could sell out then or something. So from a financial standpoint, from a fiduciary standpoint, it is irresponsible to sell the team now. If the other five, I don't think it's irresponsible. It is irresponsible financially to do it because it is an appreciating asset and they are doing wrong by the trust. This is what she's saying. They're doing wrong by the trust. I'm not saying I buy the argument. I'm just saying this is the argument.
Got it. Okay.
By doing it. And so therefore, they are, by even having this vote, they are breaking their fiduciary duty. They are violating the terms that they are, they're supposed to be able to be voting members of this thing. And that's why she's trying to kick them out. If the siblings propose, you know what, Jeannie, you're right. What if we do this? What if we say, we won't sell? We will make sure you're correct about the finances here. We won't sell if you step away from your governor role and we replace you with Jesse. And or Jesse
Joey. or Joey. They've had experience.
Or anybody.
Well, no, but Joey. Sure. No, but Joey or Jesse would make sense because they've been involved in the organization a long time.
Joey wouldn't make as much sense. Right. Jim that's not going to work. You understand the point I'm making?
Yes. Yeah.
We'll step around that fiduciary. But you can't be governor. But we will preserve our place in the trust. So from a financial standpoint, all of that stuff is preserved. How quickly does she say no to that?
Before they're even done with the final explanation.
I agree with you.
Not a shot in hell would she do that. Because otherwise, again, the simple solution, and the one that I think actually could end up happening, is just you 5 bounce. I'll stick around. I will maintain my 3 to 4% of my appreciating asset with the Lakers. Basically the same stake that Dr. Soon-Jong has, and I'll have some degree of voice and certainly a formal attachment to the organization and maintain the bus legacy and all that. I'm sure that could be doable if she'd allow it. If for no other reason, after a while, I'm sure the other 5 are like, you know what, man, let's just get the bleep out of here and get on with the rest of our lives. She would never agree to that.
Yeah, no. And what makes me sad about this is, like, I know there's a lot of conversation. I mean, how popular is Jeannie really? I think it's a different answer depending on who you ask. I think our audience, for example, people are listening every day and people are like deeply invested in the team. Soured, I think, on Jeannie over the last few years. I understand that. But I think, broadly, if there was like a nice ending, they sell out. There's a big honor. She stays on as some sort of has a job, does something with the organization. I think people, especially over time, would look back on her with a great deal of fondness.
Look, that would be a great conclusion for Jeannie. Like, I would love to see something like that.
But
happen.
This is not going to end well for her, even if she wins, because she's not going to hold on to that governorship for very long once the new owners take over. And if she tries, if she takes him to court, because that's going to be even worse. And the longer this drags out, the worse it gets for what seems like an inevitable result.
I posed this on Twitter at Cam Brothers in reaction to the news about the latest chapter of this saga, and the big filing from Adam Streisand and all of the very contentious language towards the siblings, and the siblings have had their contentious language towards Jeannie. But what I said was, because this has not come up, at least, I have not read all the 97 pages of the filing or whatever, but in terms of what has been reported, I have yet to hear Jeannie's explanation for why it is in the Lakers' best interest for the Buss family to retain this level of control, much less all of her siblings' best interest, but the Lakers' best interest. Because thus far, this has really felt like a fight over what Jeannie sees as her best interest. And
her job.
Yeah. because there's a lot of stuff in the filing and the language from Adam Streisand that you can easily turn on its head. There's one passage, Jeannie thought she had put all of her siblings' scheming and manipulations behind her in 2017. Sadly, that was not the case, and Jeannie must respectfully request relief from this court a second time. I don't recall Jeannie talking about Janie, Joey, and Jesse, their sibling manipulations in 2017 when they backed her against Jim and Johnny. And in a lot of ways, it feels now like she's using their backing of her in 2017 in this power struggle against Jim and Johnny as a way of essentially trapping them into staying minority owners. But again, if Jeannie really wants to sell this, whether to the public, frankly, to the league, because I guarantee the league would like a resolution to this. And if they got to choose between a clean forward path for the Lakers or keeping Jeannie in the governor role, bet on column A. But I would just say they really should start messaging why this is actually in the best interest of the Lakers, because they have not done that at all.
No, it's just a mess. And it's one of these things that hopefully will be sort of a mess that's somewhat incidental to what's going on. Because let's say this drags on for a few months at least, or whatever. Well, the sale is going to drag on for a few months at least. And so it's an annoying sideshow in some ways that hopefully in the end won't have a practical impact. But what it really does is diminish the legacy of a person who deserves to have a really strong one.
Well, and also for somebody that, again, in these filings keeps talking about the legacy of her father, her mother, but you are risking the last memories of this family with this franchise being ugly. And it's
if this was so important and this was she should not have sold the team in the first place.
Yep.
Once you do that, you lose the ability to control these other things.
Honestly, if it was this much of an appreciating asset, which it's always been, then you should have dug more into your liquidity, spent more on the infrastructure, and just realized on the back end we're all going to be made whole. Again, if it was that, there's already
whatever it is, but there's no. This isn't it. Once you agree to sell, you give up the control over all that other stuff.
And also you give up so much of the vision anyway, because the vision from Dr. Buss, however totally unrealistic, was for the kids to all have important roles in this organization. And once they sold, that decreased. And then once Jeannie fired the remaining ones there, it was non-existent.
She wanted to have her cake and eat it too. She thought that's what the Walters sale would allow.
And then her cake was investigated by the feds.
Her cake had $16 billion in unaccounted for loans. That, by the way, Mark Walters says were not fraudulent. And they may not have been. There's a lot going on here. But Locked On Lakers on YouTube is where you can hang out with over 39,000 subscribers. Make sure you're subscribing there. Make sure you're subscribing on Apple iTunes, Spotify, however you get your podcasts. We will see you tomorrow.